Then you had this situation here. Stephanie White pulling on her arm, tugging on her, and Caitlin Clark pulling her arm away. Right here. You know, it's just been a non-stop circus, and the people are calling for an investigation.
That physical tension right there, that is not standard professional interaction. That is a franchise cornerstone actively pulling away from her head coach on national television. When Stephanie White tugged on Caitlin Clark's arm, she sparked a massive controversy that has major sports networks from ESPN to Fox News dissecting the Indiana Fever organization. Online communities are now calling for a formal investigation into the front office and coaching staff over potential player abuse. But this sideline clash is just the tip of a deeply fractured iceberg. To understand how the relationship between a rookie superstar and a championship coach deteriorated this quickly, we have to look at the patterns of physical and verbal escalation that preceded last night's blowout loss.
We watched her get grabbed up by a referee. We're watching Stephanie White pull her arm. We watched Briann January go off on her on the bench. We obviously saw this interaction here. We saw this interaction with Stephanie White going off on her on the sideline and then throwing the clipboard. I mean, it's been...
The physical boundary lines have been blurred repeatedly this season, creating an environment where the franchise player appears entirely isolated. We saw it when an official physically grabbed Clark during a game, and we saw it again when assistant coach Briann January went off on her during a heated bench exchange. When a head coach resorts to throwing clipboards and screaming on the sidelines, it signals a complete structural breakdown. Stephanie White has officially crossed a professional line with Caitlin Clark, and the visible fallout shows a superstar who has mentally checked out of the system. But this isn't just an emotional disagreement between two competitive personalities. Independent analysts like Casey Behind the Lines have thoroughly shredded the Indiana Fever for this situation, noting that the organizational dysfunction is actively undermining the on-court product.
One of these is where the Indiana Felines have clearly given up on their coach. Watch for yourself.
Rolls, Cunningham tries to check her, Carlton.
Yeah, the Fever quit. They quit. He knows they quit.
She's yelling at the bench, and then Stephanie White she's yelling at her. And watch, she's yelling at Stephanie, and she quit.
Look at the fourth quarter footage from last night. The Indiana Fever completely quit on their head coach, showing a total lack of structural urgency. When Clark began yelling at the bench, White immediately fired back with intense hostility, causing her star player to completely abandon the active play. The resulting body language tells the story of an unfixable divide. While Clark is undeniably way too involved in directing her teammates and bypassing the coaching staff, the tactical accountability falls entirely on the leadership. White was hired specifically for her defensive expertise. Yet the Fever's defense has looked completely disorganized in critical stretches. Traditional box scores might disguise the problem, but the tape reveals a team playing with zero effort, zero defensive urgency, and a total rejection of the coaching staff's schemes.
You were supposed to be a defensive coach. The defense is trash. The defense is trash. You're switching 1 through 5, Stephanie White. You're just switching and leaving people on islands with no help at all. It's bad basketball. It's horrible coaching. And for you to supposed to be some defensive coach, it's terrible. And that's another reason she just gotta go. This lady has to get fired.
The tactical execution under Stephanie White has completely dismantled the Fever's offensive rhythm and turned their defensive identity into an absolute liability. Implementing a strict 1 through 5 switching scheme without establishing weak side help has repeatedly left vulnerable defenders isolated on islands against elite perimeter scorers. It is fundamentally bad basketball and a clear sign of horrible coaching. While defenders of the staff point to advanced analytics ranking the team 4th in defensive rating, the raw reality is that the Fever sit near the bottom of the league in opponents' points per game. At this early stage of the season, data-driven analytics are highly volatile and fail to reflect the true context of the games. The eye test on the floor proves that the roster has stopped playing hard for White. And in professional basketball, a locker room mutiny always points to one logical conclusion.
What does Stephanie White do? She puts Caitlin Clark on the bench. Couple of minutes into the game, and your best player is on the bench? I don't ever remember seeing Phil Jackson subbing out Michael Jordan. In the first quarter alone, Stephanie White played 11 different players. It looked like a damn hockey game, players shuffling in and out of the lineup.
The coaching staff's rotational strategy last night looked less like professional basketball and more like a chaotic hockey game, with 11 different players shuffled onto the court in the first quarter alone. No team can develop an offensive rhythm or defensive cohesion when the lineup is constantly changing every 90 seconds. Even more baffling was White's decision to bench Caitlin Clark just a few minutes into the first quarter, right after she had recorded 4 rapid assists and established a dominant tempo. Legendary coaches like Phil Jackson never subbed out Michael Jordan during a hot opening stretch just to adhere to a rigid substitution timeline. This brings us to a major roster controversy that occurred during the first round of the draft. The front office's decision to draft South Carolina point guard Raven Johnson left analysts stunned, as the roster desperately needed perimeter size and defensive stopping power, not another primary ball handler to crowd the backcourt.
Initially, I didn't think Raven Johnson was drafted to replace Caitlin Clark. I mean, on the surface, that sounds absurd, right? You don't draft a replacement for your only star. You don't draft a replacement for your best player. Right. But it is abundantly clear at this point, Stephanie White prefers Raven Johnson running the offense over Caitlin Clark.
The underlying motivation behind drafting Raven Johnson is finally coming to light, and it exposes a massive internal power struggle. While drafting a backup point guard to replace your only generational superstar sounds completely absurd on the surface, the on-court evidence shows that Stephanie White actively prefers Johnson running the offense over Caitlin Clark. This coaching preference has created massive institutional tension. Clark is certainly not blameless in this dynamic. Her high-risk passing leads to far too many turnovers, and her defensive liabilities make her an easy target for opposing offenses. In the modern basketball landscape, you cannot easily become the definitive face of a league without developing two-way capabilities. But when an irreconcilable rift forms between a generational draw and a head coach, professional sports franchises must make a calculated business decision.
Again, Caitlin Clark is not blameless, but when you have a problem, when there is tension between your star player and your head coach, you don't get rid of the star, you fire the coach.
1000%. Shout out to KC behind the lines. Man, he was cooking. He was cooking with this one. Absolutely cooking, man. People calling for Stephanie White's job left and right, man. People calling for an investigation on this organization. I'm not mad at either one. Get down in the comments. Let me know what you think.
When the relationship between a superstar player and a head coach becomes toxic, the front office doesn't trade the franchise anchor. You fire the coach 1000% of the time. The financial and cultural reality of the modern WNBA means that player empowerment dictates organizational direction, especially when dealing with a historic rating asset like Clark. The public calls for an investigation, and the immediate termination of Stephanie White are growing louder after every single broadcast, and the front office cannot ignore the visible erosion of team chemistry. If the players have stopped competing for the coaching staff, keeping White on the bench will only permanently damage the development of their prized rookie. The corporate hierarchy of sports entertainment dictates that coaches are entirely replaceable, while generational talents are completely unique. If White cannot adapt her switching schemes, fix her chaotic rotations, and respect the operational boundaries of her star player, her tenure in Indiana will cut short before the season concludes. This entire situation leaves the Indiana Fever front office at a critical historical crossroads. They are forced to choose between backing a veteran coach's rigid system or protecting the psychological and physical well-being of the player driving the league's entire economic boom. If you look across the landscape of professional basketball history, any coach who fails to get on the same page as their primary star inevitably loses their job. The visible frustration on the bench, the physical pulling away during timeouts, and the complete collapse of defensive effort are all clear symptoms of a locker room that has completely fractured beyond repair. The front office must act decisively before this toxic environment permanently derails the franchise's long-term future. If the coaching staff is actively hindering Clark's development and forcing a style of play that alienates the locker room, then an immediate coaching change is the only viable path forward. So who is actually in the wrong here? Is Stephanie White justified in using hard-nosed, physical coaching to try and discipline a high-turnover rookie? Or has this coaching staff crossed a professional line into active alienation and player mismanagement? You cannot stay on the fence for this one. Pick a side right now, drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if the Fever need to fire Stephanie White immediately. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share Keep the Vision so you never miss another deep dive into the business of the WNBA.